Hello and welcome to Trees, the Silent Sentinels. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm glad that you have opted to spend the next 30 minutes with my guest. In last week's program, the spotlight fell on two trees, the casuarina tree and the manchineel tree. After a description of both of these trees, we look at their critical role in preventing beach erosion here in Barbados. This week we shall continue our look at coastal trees. We begin the program with our colleague Dr. John Webster, who took us to a beautiful bay in the far northwestern corner of the island. John?
Here we are on Maycock's Beach, the parish of St. Lucie. And we came here to have a look at the coastal protection being offered by trees along this coast. The trees that predominate are manchineel. We have a massive one here. There are several casuarinas and there are several mayho trees. And the roots of these trees are so entwined that they preserve the integrity of the coastline as best as they can. And if we took a look around with the camera, we would see how the roots, even though they're somewhat exposed, are still holding the soil together at the edge of the land here, right where the land and the sand from the sea meet. So here we have a good example of the importance of trees along our coastline to preserve the coastline from erosion.
Our colleague Carla Daniel joins Dr. John Webster on the Maycock's Beach. She embellishes the role of these trees in preventing beach erosion, and she points out a number of features of the trees found on the Maycock's Beach.
One of the primary features of this coastline are these magnificent trees. Now, the vegetation primarily consists of manchineel and maho, and the maho is a lovely tree. First, you have these gorgeous heart-shaped leaves with those yellow veins, but in addition to that, you have some very pretty flowers. Now, very similar to the hibiscus in the same family, you can see it looks amazingly like the ornamental hibiscus that people have planted at home. Now, what the vegetation does is that it helps to stabilize the sand, so when you have a high swell or some rough waves coming up, the roots of the trees would help to hold the sand together and keep the beach steady.
In addition to stabilizing the beaches, the trees play a fundamental role in being habitats for some of the island's fauna. And that fauna, of course, do play a pivotal role in regulating the environment and allowing us to enjoy the seasons.
But it also provides adequate habitat for a number of species. It helps stabilize the beach for sea turtle nesting. It also would create leaf litter, which would break down and help to nourish the beach, so you get the continuance of vegetation. It provides a wonderful aesthetic, as you can see as well. Now, the amazing thing about all of these plants, including the sea grape, which we have behind us, is their salt tolerance. So when we have very dry conditions, because plants which are usually tolerant of salt are also typically tolerant of drought as well.
The sea grape tree, Cocoloba uvifera. It's something that's very common to islands across the region, and in Barbados it's very much associated with the coast, although it can grow inland just as well. And it bears these berries here, which when they're nice and ripe, a little sort of reddish purplish color, they can be used for making juice. You collect a lot of them and spin them around, you get the sea grape juice, or a wine, as it's done in some islands. You actually ferment these seeds here, the fruit, and you create your sea grape wine.
Some among us would recall those days when the presence of sea grape tree on the beach presented an opportunity for many boys and girls to use their imagination and become creative. You might recall how in a previous series, Spike's Our Forgotten Treasure, our guest Peggy McGarry amused us with her memories of pond boat racing in Spikestown. Well, I'm not absolutely sure what you would wish to refer to this one as, but Dr. Lynotte's Honey Church explains the method.
The leaves, it's something that has died out in Barbados, but certainly in the days before a lot of imported toys, children were very inventive indeed with what they found around them. So here you have this coconut husk here. You take a piece of stick, you take a nice big leaf of the sea grape tree, and you have your little boat, which you take down to the water and you set sail. Another ingenious use for the sea grape leaf in the days when there was the mass production and collection of sea eggs was to make a natural cone out of the sea grape leaf, and of course this would be combined with a piece of the dried coconut leaf, and by putting this together here you would be able to have a natural container for your sea eggs, and you'll be able to sell these sea eggs, biodegradable, no styrofoam, and really a great ecological solution to the sale and the use of sea eggs. Of course that's gone, it's all part of a past heritage of Barbados. But these are very useful indeed, once again for shoring up the seaside and preventing erosion by the sea. It's also very protective for sea turtles. So when the turtles come in, a lot of times they can go underneath. This is in the ideal situation where you have just sea grape trees along an unbuilt coastline.
Now, throughout the years, many archaeologists have come across many pieces of pottery with a sea grape leaf impression. No, the sea grape leaf was not the armorial bearing of the Amerindian people. There is so much that we can learn from this. It gives an idea about the number of years which this tree was in Barbados, and it tells us something about the properties of its leaves.
It was known to the indigenous people because it is an indigenous plant of Barbados, and we do find certain bits of pottery which, while they were being made, was rested on the sea grape. So you get the wet clay sitting on the sea grape, a leaf, and when you look at the bottom of the pot, you know, like 2,000 years later in today's date, you say, they rested their wet pot on a sea grape leaf. And so these little links with the past show us the length of time with human interaction on this island of Barbados, going back thousands of years, that the sea grape has been used.
Many joiners and woodworkers throughout the region have testified about the beautiful finishes that they have had from the wood of the sea grape tree.
Its wood is also very good if you get an older sea grape with a thick trunk. It's a very hard wood, beautiful sheen to it, and it was used in certain instances in furniture wood and also for boards on the interior of houses, because in its unpainted state it made a beautiful wood lining of an interior wall. All of these aspects of what is called the ethnobotany of Caribbean Barbadian plants, and the sea grape is one of these.
So these are some quite hardy plants, and you don't have to plant them, you know, if you live close to the shore. You will have, traveling around Barbados, you also see sea grape and maho growing quite far inland as well. So they're very good. You wouldn't have to be providing a whole lot of water. But if you do live close to the coast, you don't have the problem with them dying off because of the concentrated salt spray.
Although the program's chief concern is that of trees as silent sentinels, we nevertheless thought it important to call attention to a patch of grass that plays a fundamental role in preventing coastal erosion.
This is a patch of crabgrass. It's actually quite common on beaches. It's very salt tolerant, and it will be found growing, it can be found growing very close to the water. because as you can see here, the distance between the last bit of grass and the water isn't much. So when the waves are high, it probably does get drenched by some sea spray, and it's able to grow quite happily under these high salt conditions. Another wonderful feature of the Maycox area is this freshwater path that comes down directly to the north of the cement plant at the southern end of the beach. You'll find that the vegetation here is quite different. We still have those lovely mature trees, but you'll notice that they seem to be very, very green. We also have the introduction of some ficus, you can tell from their hanging roots. And you'll also notice that with the fresh water, we now have some river tamarin taking root, and we have some of the typical grasses which are more likely to see inland, which may not be as salt tolerant as the other plants. You will also notice that we have a number of seedlings which appear to be germinating, and right here we have a number of maho seedlings which are coming up, and that's probably due to the fresh water as well. Unfortunately, at this point it's relatively dry, so we don't have the water flowing, but you can still see the lovely lush green area with its perfect window to the sea. And that's something that was very common in Barbados. You would have normally had your mangrove swamps landward, which led directly on to beautiful white beaches, and just in front of them you would have had your seagrass, followed immediately behind by your coral reefs. Unfortunately, there are not too many areas on the island where it's still possible to see that, but we do have many beaches with watercourses coming down where the runoff from our gullies comes straight down to the coast and out to sea. Behind me you can see this lovely clump of maho, and one of the added benefits of having vegetation along the coastline is the breaking of waves in extreme weather events. So you have a hurricane coming through. When you have a very clear coastline, you have those massive swells just rolling right on the beach. They damage property, they'll damage infrastructure, but when you have vegetation there to help break some of the force of those waves, you'll manage to protect much of your coastal infrastructure. So trees make a lovely buffer between your infrastructure and nature.
The Maycox Beach is beautiful and unspoiled, with several coastal trees protecting the coastline. But what is somewhat surprising is the presence of mahogany trees there. Well, when you consider that this is a tree which does not normally grow near the coastline of Barbados for obvious reason, you might ask, why is the tree here? Well, Carla explains.
Another interesting aspect of this freshwater area is the seeding of so many trees. Now, you wouldn't typically find mahogany this close to the water, but because it's provided with a nice source of fresh water, they're able to hopefully survive, but they've definitely germinated. So there are a number of mahogany trees here behind me. You can see some quite young ones. We also have a young maho right here in the middle, and there are also some young ficus. So hopefully we'll have another wonderful bearded fig tree growing up right here. What you really don't want to break is, how far that one go? Is a prop root right down here at the base.
I tell you, and in sand too, you know, I'm surprised. I thought it would have.
You see how the sand look black? Smells okay though. It doesn't smell like Christina. You got some muted mahogany tree that you take home. Alright, I think we've loosened this side. It's lovely. I think we got most of the roots fairly intact, and the prop root is the important part, and that isn't really broken off. Most of it is there, so we should be good.
Well, my mahogany tree has been planted. It is growing and will provide shade to many in years to come, and certainly well after I have departed this life. Now we come to yet another tree that is very good at preventing coastal erosion. We know it has the West Indian almond, but is it really indigenous to the West Indies?
Now this is very deceptive, because although it in many books carries the title West Indian almond to differentiate it from the Mediterranean almond, it really does not originate in the West Indies at all. It comes from the other India, that is the Indian subcontinent itself and the Indian Ocean, and was brought here by people and planted within the islands. Once again, it is a tree with a wide spreading root system, very good for protecting the shoreline. And here in Barbados, as many other islands in the Caribbean, you find the almond growing all along the seashore. Particularly close to it, it can tolerate the sea salt. Both the leaves, the foliage, and the roots can tolerate the sea salt in a very great way. So they're very suitable for that. The one little advantage they have in a way is that within the seed pod, you have an edible nut. Now it is this that gives it the name almond, because it has no family, it's not a family to the Mediterranean almond that we know and buy imported here from California and various other places. But this local almond, maybe not as much now as in the past, would be, when it was dry, cut open, bent out, and this little seed-like nut is edible. And if you gather enough of them, you can actually boil them with sugar and make a very nice, tasty, sweet dessert. And so the other thing that happens to these pods is they're very popular with fruit bats. So the fruit bats, one of the indigenous mammals of Barbados, love these pods, take them away, they scrape off the edge, the sort of skin. That's the part they really like. But in flying, they carry the seeds and they drop them along the way. So as they are traveling with these, once they are finished eating the flesh of the almond seed, the bats, in fact, help to spread the almonds across the landscape. And as we know, they are mostly associated with the seashore of Barbados.
Talking about being spread along the seacoast of Barbados, Bernie Gibbs, who introduced us to the Mafala breadfruit in a previous program, lists a number of trees and shrubs that are usually planted on the coast to prevent beach erosion and help in reducing the effects of sea spray.
There are quite a few trees actually that people will plant, or bushes that people will plant on the seaside, because it does help to mitigate the salt spray. Trees such as, or shrubs such as silver dollar, obviously coconut trees, tamarix is another good one. And then all of our traditional seaside trees like the seaside maho, the cordia, which bears a nice orange flower, scivola. All of these will be really beautiful elements in the landscape, while at the same time cutting down the effects of salt spray on the sort of the windward side of the island.
Many shipbuilders made very good use of the West Indian white cedar, for the wood from this tree was very popular in the making of fishing boats, a special feature of the maritime history and heritage of not only Barbados, but the West Indies.
This is the West Indian white cedar, Tabebuia heterophylla. Here we are in front of a tree that has played an important part in the ethnobotany, the botany of the people of Barbados, because of its importance as a furniture wood, building wood, but particularly as a wood used for building boats over the centuries. It is a tree that is indigenous to the island, indigenous in that, remember, Barbados was pushed up from the ocean, soil developed, and all of the plants that are considered to be indigenous to Barbados, or even the couple that are endemic, were actually brought up from the Guyanas on the floodwaters of the Orinoco River coming out and then being brought up along to the shores of Barbados, and the seeds, but also the trees themselves on the floating drift, landing on the shores and then propagating naturally and extending into the island. So this is one of the trees that, along with the bearded fig tree and others, would have been found on the indigenous Barbados. And it is very important because It was used not only in the construction of houses, not only in the use of the sugar mills when sugar took over, but also particularly in boat building. And when one looks at the branches, you can see the way the tree develops with the extended branches coming out of the main branch. You will find that there are excellent natural features for the making of the ribs of boats, whether they are small boats, the kind that we call Moses, or the larger schooners and other seafaring vessels that go further afield up the islands. So that by looking at this tree, the shipwrights were able to find the sections that would be suitable depending on the curves, depending on the angles of the branches, to be able then to cut and make into ribs for the buildings of boats. The main trunk itself could be sliced by making boards, and these boards then could be used to clad the outside of the hull of the ship. So that we see in many different uses, in many different ways, the natural features of this tree, white cedar, was important in use. And in fact, what happened is very early on in the settlement of Barbados, the numbers of these trees declined. We know that just down the islands in the Grenadines, shipbuilding was very important. In fact, some ships are still built, but one of the problems is because of the reduction of the numbers of white cedar trees, it has been difficult to get enough timber to be able to construct these schooners or sloops or smaller vessels in the traditional manner. But a very important aspect of Barbadian history right here in the West Indian white cedar.
A discussion of coastal trees in Barbados is incomplete without making mention of the mangroves. Sadly, we have lost many of them. Haywoods, Land's End, just to name a few. Carla Daniel now takes us to one of the remaining mangroves here on the island. It is the hole in Hole Town, where history records as the arrival point of the English who sailed upon Barbados in 1627.
Standing here at the mouth of the Hole Town Hole, now unfortunately it's just a shadow of what it once was. At one time, the Hole Town Hole was an expansive area that stretched south of here almost all the way down to Sunset Crest. Now at that time, the vegetation that you would see would be predominantly mangroves. However, if you take a closer look, you'll see that the mangroves have been mostly replaced by maho. We also have some coconut trees now growing in. There are also a few Indian almonds, or what we call seaside almonds, as well. The hole mainly serves currently as a runoff, so you get water coming down from the higher parts of the island during the rainy season, and that water would come down, flow through the hole, and flow out to sea. Now at one point, this was actually the site of a quite large egret rookery. It's unfortunately no longer present, but in the evenings you could see the egrets coming home to roost, and when you come down it would be a very loud, argumentative place with all the birds calling and cackling at each other. And unfortunately, there seemed to be some issue between the noise that the rookery was causing and the guests at nearby hotels. Now that soon wasn't a problem because some of the trees were removed. At one point you can see I'm standing here on the remnants of one of those trees, and the rookery was disbanded. Well, disbanded or displaced. Well, now you can see that many of those trees which were mangroves have been replaced by the same maho, which is directly across. So in front of me you have a very small mangrove tree, but unfortunately there are not too many of them left here at the Hole Town Hole.
Aware of the importance of mangroves and rookeries, specifically the essential role they play in the ecosystem of Barbados, Carla expresses a wish for these areas to become part of the island's heritage tourism product.
It's a very iconic spot. Unfortunately, it's not really well signed, so most people, the average person or tourist that passes, wouldn't know the significance of this area to Barbados. But we hope that at some point, especially with the importance of wetlands to species diversity and to the health of the coastline, that the Hole Town Hole could be restored, brought up to scratch a little bit and kept so that future generations could know the site of first settlement and the importance of this location to the history of Whole Town, St. James, and the history of Barbados.
Hundreds of vehicles cross the bridge here over the Hole daily. But how many of you pause to admire its beauty? How many of you pause and ponder on the important role it plays in the ecosystem of Barbados, providing that passage of water from the land directly into the sea?
The Whole Town Hole is at present restricted to this very narrow corridor between two hotels lined with trees on either side. It's fed, as we said, with fresh water that comes down during the rainy season from the higher portions of the island that flow right down through the Whole Town Hole and out to sea. Now the sandbar that you can see currently at the mouth of the hole where we were previously standing is only there during the dry season, because once those rains start to fall, we get water rushing out and that sand is removed and the connection to the sea is fully open. While perhaps not as cultural or historically significant as the Whole Town Hole, there are a number of other holes, so to speak, that can be seen along the west and the south coast. Now, there are a number of prominent ones in Speightstown. There's one just north in Heron Bay, and these are really where the gully systems connect, and that water stream flows down during the rainy season and exits onto the coast of Barbados. Now, they are, for the most part, completely cemented, so you have some nice cement canals so the water can flow unrestricted. And as you're standing here during any time of the year, whatever we put into our gullies, whether it is garbage, whether it is, waste that we're disposing of from a construction site or coconuts, they all eventually get washed down through that gully system, find their way out through the canals and out into the sea, into our nearshore environment.
Whenever you see a tree planted along the coastline of Barbados, please do think of its place on the beachscape. It stands as a silent sentinel, guarding us and protecting the environment naturally from the elements. This ensures that today's generation and future generations would be continually protected as we take greater pride in looking after what we have come to love so dearly and what has now become a major feature in attracting tourists to Barbados and boosting our foreign exchange. Until next week at the same time, I'm Sherwood McCaskey. I'm gone in search of more trees.